Shabbat shalom, everyone. In this morning's class that I had, I talked about a disagreement in the Talmud about when the year actually begins. Does the year begin in Tishrei or does the year begin in Nisan? The Torah states that the year begins in Nisan. Very good. You get an extra half bagel at Kiddush. Very good. So the Torah tells us that on the seventh month, the first day of the seventh month, we should have a Yom Truah, and that becomes Rosh Hashanah. But the Torah never tells us that the world was created on the first day of the seventh month. And so we have two separate calendars. One holiday that begins on Monday night, where we gather in our homes around our tables. The other holiday in the fall, where we purchase tickets and come to synagogue. Two very different philosophical beginnings of the year. And I would argue that whether or not Monday night begins a new year, or whether we're just commemorating our first festival since the fall, we're going to all note on Monday night our Seders in many different ways that it's been an awfully rough year for the Jewish people around the world. This past week, Rabbi Feinstein and I, we accumulated Passover supplements that have been offered by many different organizations. We curated and sent it out to the community. Zionist Rabbinic Coalition, Metzora, Shalom Hartman Institute, the hostage families. Many different have brought different sources to inform our Passover Seder this year. So this year, when the child stands to ask, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh, how is tonight so different than all other nights? That's the child's question. For us as adults, the question is, how is Passover different this year than other years? How is the meaning of the Seder different for us this year than other years? Rabbi Feinstein and I talked a little bit about this yesterday afternoon because many of us will incorporate gestures, symbols into our Seders. As I mentioned earlier in the service, we will have an extra chair at our Seder table to remember those still being held in captivity in Gaza. Many have written about how they're going to have the dog tags, Halev Shali Shavui Ba'aza, that my heart is still in Gaza, and my heart's being held captive in Gaza, will be on their tables. Many of us still wear them. But we are away, we're far away. There's distance from the period of heavy lifting that began in October and November. The drive to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to safeguard the state of Israel, that's behind us. Our inclination to raise a VBS Israel Emergency Fund feels long ago. And all of us seem to ask ourselves in this moment, what more can we do to help? From my first trip to Israel in November, it was explained to me, and all the other rabbis from Los Angeles who were on the trip, that what October 7th revealed to Israelis is that on October 7th, the government of Israel completely failed. For hours, for too many hours, the Israel Defense Forces failed. But the heroes of October 7th, the trust that actually upheld, that withstood the assault of October 7th, the third trust was the trust in Am Yisrael, the trust that the Jewish people would show up to help one another. For decades, it felt as though Israel and American Jewry were on divergent paths heading in very different directions. And from my first trip to Israel, my second trip to Israel, the VBS Maccabee mission in December, it feels once again like the Jewish people all around the world is in this together. On the plane to Israel, we met Jews from Los Angeles and Jews from Australia who had come in and had a layover in Los Angeles. In Israel, we met Jews from all around the world who are coming to proudly bear the title of mitnavim. Mitnavim means volunteers. And it was baffling to Israelis that while the fires still rage, there were Jewish people all around the world who ran toward the fire. This is a very different year than the year that we're going to read about in the Passover Haggadah. We showed up this year to help save ourselves. And the job is not yet complete. And so how do we incorporate that notion into the Passover Seder? In addition to the myriad and myriad of writings that we shared with everyone, the links to different websites, I'm going to offer one small gesture that I've decided to incorporate this year into my Passover. Because Passover is about big ideas like Exodus and freedom and liberty and faith. But it's also about the smallest little minutia, the details. That's why Passover begins with the very first ritual of B'dikat Chametz. Because before we can look at the big picture, we have to walk around our homes with a candle and a tiny feather looking for morsels of cracker that I just placed 5 minutes earlier in the exact places that we're going to look for. And that exercise is a microcosm of all of Passover. Because Passover is the theater that we create. We create the experiential educational model of the Seder. And then we enact it ourselves. We place the tiny little crumbs around our house, and then we go search for them and pat ourselves on the back when we find them all. B'dikat Chametz teaches us a lesson that sometimes we can't fix the biggest, most glaring idea, the biggest, most glaring problem. Whether it be the war in Israel, whether it be the typhoon of anti-Semitism that seems to have engulfed American society this year. Sometimes we can focus on just the crumbs, on the smallest details. And in beginning with the details and accomplishing even the smallest of details, we accomplish something. We help move the holiday forward in some way. One of the reasons I love Passover so much, especially as a conservative rabbi, is that all throughout the year, I hardly receive any kind of halachic questions whatsoever. During the year, we as a community focus on all kinds of wonderful ideas, like celebrating Shabbat, Oneg Shabbat, Kiddush, celebrations, life cycles. But then suddenly on Passover, I begin to get questions as Passover approaches. Rabbi, my second set of dishes, or even my third set of dishes, by accident saw my first set of dishes. Am I allowed to use them, or should I go buy a fourth and fifth set of dishes for Passover? Passover brings about a different kind a different kind of attention to detail. Different kind of attention to detail amongst our people. And so it was, in fact, this week that I received a question from one of my most favorite families, the Robin family. The question was for Yonit, who's the color of her shawl right now. And the question was, can we eat kitniot? Leading up to this day that is a day celebrating my PhD, I decided to read, once again, Rabbi David Golinkin, one of my most favorite Jewish scholars still living in the world, his tshuva from 2015. Now the tshuva is 29 pages, I think, 23 pages, 22 pages, written about the smallest rice and beans and whatnot. But I'm going to read you some excerpts, and I'm going to explain to you why I'm reading them to you today. The question, why do Ashkenazic Jews refrain from eating rice, beans, and kitniot on Pesach? Is there any way of doing away with this custom which causes much hardship and also divides Jewish communities and even members of the same family? And I want to tell you that if you took a DNA test, I've never done a DNA test because I think that it would be a waste of money, but I believe if you took a DNA test of me or any of the members of my family, I think it would be 99.9% Ashkenazic, 0.1% Cholent. Right? So we'd end up in this place where we're so Ashkenazic, we've never even considered eating kitniot. All right. Brief summary of his response. In our opinion, it is permitted to eliminate this custom. It is in direct contradiction to an explicit decision in the Babylonian Talmud and in contradiction in the opinion of the sages of the Mishnah and the Talmud. But it is an important minhag. And we cannot underestimate the power of minhag, the power of tradition, in each of our families in the way that we celebrate Passover, in the way that we celebrate Yiddishkeit, Judaism. The custom is mentioned for the first time in France in Provence in the 13th century by Rav Asher of Lunel, Rav Samuel of Falaise, and Rav Peretz of Corbeil, and others. I don't know much about those three rabbis, but I know that they enjoyed good wine. And from there, it spread to various countries, and the list of prohibited foods continued to expand. Somehow, in the 13th century, in France and Provence, it became a good idea to restrict more and more foods, make more and more foods not kosher for Passover. And Rabbi Golinkin traces this against what is the expressed wishes of the rabbis of the Talmud, to see if these extra strictures are appropriate. Therefore, the main halachic question in this case is whether it is permissible to do away with a mistaken or foolish custom, is exactly what Rabbi Golinkin writes at the bottom of the first page. And now I'm going to jump 18 pages to the beginning of the conclusion to read you the first line. We would like to briefly address an important point vis-a-vis this custom. Is it desirable to perpetuate the differences between Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Italians, and Yemenites in Israel and among the diaspora? Perhaps it is preferable to eliminate these distinctions and create one unified Jewish people. This is a worthy topic deserving of a book of its own. In addition to the chair that we're putting out at the Passover Seder, in addition to the dog tag that'll be on the table, in addition to reading our friend Rachel Goldberg Poland's words that she spoke at the United Nations, this year I have decided, not for the two Seders where there would be so much disagreement I can't even withstand it. After all, I don't lead the Seders. I'm not old enough to lead a Seder, so my dad leads the Seder. I'm not gonna change the rules of our Seders. But following the Seders for the remaining 6 days, our family is going to begin eating kitniot here in Los Angeles. We ate kitniot only once before, and that was the year that we lived in Israel. Because in kitniot in the supermarkets, they don't differentiate very much what's kitniyot, what's not kitniyot, because Israelis keep Passover according to being together. And it's only when you get to Meir Sharim and Geula and those neighborhoods that you really start to see kitniyot only displays. The truth is, I don't know what else I can do at this point to teach my children that they belong to the same people as the Yemenites and the Italians and the Sephardic soldiers who stand right now on the front lines in Gaza, in the north, and in the Golan Heights. And if in some way this small gesture of eating kitniyot brings them closer to those distant cousins whose DNA is not made up 99% Ashkenazic and 1% Cholent. It's made up 99% Sephardic, 1% Iraq. I want them to know that that's their family. That's their family. And we still have steps to take to make our whole people know that we're one. We stand together. And if you have other ideas, I'd love to hear it. Because what the beginning of Passover teaches us, what B'dikat Chametz teaches us, is that there's no idea too small, too unworthy, without merit, to be considered in a moment like this, in a year like this. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh? The answer is everything. But the answer is also one of hope. The answer is we know the answer. The answer is us, the people at the Passover Seder. We were the answer following October 7th. And the more that we reflect on it and learn from one another, the more that we can be the answer for one another each and every time each one of us faces a crisis. Whether it be a national crisis, a communal crisis, or an individual one. We're the answer. I look forward to you sharing with me the steps that you're going to take this Passover to make your Seders unique and reflect this year. On behalf of myself and Blair and our entire family, on behalf of Rabbi Feinstein and his family, on behalf of Cantor Raffi and her family, on behalf of Yossi Dresner hiding in the corner and his family, and all of the leadership here at Valley Beth Shalom, we want to wish you a Zisen Passover, a sweet Passover, a Chag Kasher V'Sameach, a happy, joyful, and kosher Passover that this year for my family will include rice. Chag Sameach.